All right, gang. It's time to set notes. I hope you guys are all doing well. We have a couple note sets that we're going to do this week. We're going to start a new section on the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to talk about how it actually does apply to both North and the South and how it actually is something that's going to lead to the Civil War. So what you'll need to do is, like you did before, pull up your set of notes for the section. It's not very long. When you're finished with it, send it back to me and make sure that you have the questions done on the back so you can get your credit. So let me start the slideshow and we shall begin. All right, so it's called the Industrial Revolution. So the first two things that we need to look at are the words themselves. You have industrial and then you have revolution. So let's talk about revolution because we've had that before. For the revolution, it says 1820 to 1870, and this is actually the United States Industrial Revolution we're going to talk about. Not so much the one that happened in England, which is more first than anything else. But the word revolution we've had before. Think a second to times that we've had it. Ding, ding. The American Revolution. Your root word for revolution is to revolt. To revolt means basically to go against something. So in this case, it's not really like a war. Like the American Revolution, it's like a change. So in this case, it has to deal with what the first word, which is industrial. Our root word is industry. So when you look at an industry, I have this picture up here. You're going from agricultural, more like farms, to actually industry or like factories. So in other words, for this 50-year time period in the United States, you were going from agriculture to industry. So the big thing is that we're going to see what kind of changes are made. It doesn't mean that farming goes away. What it does mean is that certain areas of the United States are going to change over from being mostly agrarian or agricultural to being more industrial and like factories. So if you think about modern cities, some of your big cities that have that industry or big smokestacks or factories or things like that, that's where this time period really pushes that change to it. So less agricultural, less farming, and more industrial. So what we're talking about this time period is when machines take the place of hand tools. So, prior to this, and you see this in the Pioneer video that you're watching, Frontier House, that they have to do all that stuff by hand. They have very few machines or that will actually do the work for them. So I know this is a cheesy little picture here down at the bottom, but railroads. And then anybody know what that thing is on the left? It's not a record player. It's a cotton gin. So a simple thing just like this, a movable object on two rails, powered by coal and steam, and then this little thing that you turn and it pulls out the seeds of cotton. That's huge. And so something that's been around since the 1800s, 1850s, 40s, you're like your train, still used today. So you go from hardships of life and farming and such to machines making things so much easier for you. And it's not just like factories, but also making things comfortable for you too. So we also have to focus on power and your power. Sorry, trying to move this thing a little bit over. Okay, so power. Try to get this thing off of my screen, but it can't. Doesn't want to. All right, but anyways, you're going from man and horsepower to water and steam power instead. So your picture on the left is what it was, and your picture on the right is how it's going to be. So think about some of the things that changes from that. The idea that you don't have to rely on a human being so much to move something versus an inanimate object there on the right, which is going to be your earliest train. And powered again by steam, by coal, and in some cases, we'll talk about factories with water as well. And you look at your train; it's pretty basic. You've got the guy up front, you've got the coal behind him, steam firing into a fire, and then your smoke coming out here, and powering, just the engine, pulling everything else. This is really all that you need in the front of it. And how much are you going to be able to pull versus, one horse? One other thing that I do want to point out on this is this right here. Anybody think about what that is? Anybody know what that object is? I'm not pointing to it. I gotta get my little pointer out. There we go. this little thing here. It's called a cow catcher. The reasoning is because back in the day when they had these railroads, they would go through farmland, and a lot of times your animals, your cows, would just kind of be free walking around, and so these would gently nudge them off of the tracks if they were in the way. Not really, they would just plow over them and through them, but it would move the cows, in other words, without smashing them to bits in the front of the train. So your factories are really your main thing that we'll talk about with the Industrial Revolution. This is where your big changes come. And you can see this picture here. It's not just like jobs changing, but it's also city life that will change as well. So your factories are really where you have your workers and machines in one place. Now, one thing that we're going to talk about here in this section is your people who are employed there. And if you look at this, these are children are working in this factory. You say, well, how is that even legal at the time period? Well, there weren't any rules. There were no rules for schooling. There were really no rules for factory life. So kids could go to work there. So look at this kid in the front. He has like half shorts on, and he has no socks, has no shoes, and he's got his hands in the machines. Well, that's because these kids would often be able to do the work because they're smaller than adults would. And some of these kids are orphans. They don't have any family. So if something would happen to where they might, let's say, perish in the factory, the question becomes, well, who cares? They're just orphans. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's the thought of people at the time period. So that is why this is important to talk about, because you're not talking about just machinery and industry changing, but also societally, things are going to change as well. So when you say use of steam, I mentioned this before, is your water, is a lot of your early factories were built along rivers, and you still have factories along rivers today because they have hydropower or hydroelectric power. So when you go up to the Great Lakes or along the Ohio River, you will see factories all along those because they still use water power today. You also have the growth of textiles, vocabulary word. Textiles means the making of cloth or clothing. And that would be like this. And if you look at this factory here, you can see that they have what would be called a bunch of looms, or objects that are going to make the cloth out of cotton and such. And you can see how far down that goes. And a lot of these are just the same types of machinery, and that will come to something else here in a second called mass production. But you'll also see a woman working in this. And so here's another change where females are going to have the opportunity to work in these factories and make money, whereas before in society, then maybe they might have been handcuffed to be at home and just be a mother, but now they're able to go and work at a lot of these early factories. So speaking of mass production is what we're seeing here, backing it up in this picture. But mass production is, and I have a bunch of Coke bottles here, the rapid making of an identical object. Well, if you can open up a company that makes something in mass, like say bottles, that can be used for a variety of different things, that's still going to be profitable for you, even if you don't have anything to put in said glass, because people are going to need these pretty quickly. You know, imagine if you're just a bottle maker, you don't really care what goes in it, but you can sell it to people who make syrup, people who make medicine, people who make Coca-Cola, whatever. They didn't have Coca-Cola in the 1800s, but anyways, you get the idea. So with this mass production and rapid making of it, rather than one at a time, then a lot of these groups businesses are going to be profitable. Even if they make only one thing, but they make it well and they make a lot of it, then that's going to be their business. You also have this phrase called interchangeable parts. Now, interchangeable parts, it means that similar pieces could be substituted by unskilled workers. Meaning that, like, if you have something that breaks, then you could have someone trained who's going to be able to put those new pieces in, or perhaps like repair it or whatever. But very interchangeable, meaning that you could, you know, use it from one thing to the next as well. So all of these terms, mass production, interchangeable parts, textiles, all are going to be relevant to the growth of these factories. And it's a process of learning what works and works what works well for you, and finding a product that's going to be able to be used for the most part in society as a whole. So because of this, manufacturing becomes efficient, meaning that they do it very well, they do it very quickly, and then prices start to drop on things. Let's see what picture I have. Okay, yeah. So imagine it's like clothing. So you have, say, grandma is just making you one shirt at a time. She measures you, she makes your shirt, she puts a little button on it, she sews it up, and there you go. Grandma made you a shirt. But now imagine that you've got a factory where they're making the cloth. They don't even have to make the cloth there, but they can just get it, and they have, miles of girls on sewing machines, not to be sexist, because that's how they had them at the time period. Those ladies, and just making these shirts in mass and piles and piles and piles of them. And then you go to the store and you buy them. Grandma, you're very thankful for the pretty plaid shirt that she made you, but it's actually almost easier to go and get the stuff at the store. You think about it today. If my pants rip, am I going to fix them? Probably not. Is my grandma going to make them? Probably not. What am I going to do? I'm probably going to run to the store, pay $20 for a pair of pants, and I'm all good. Yeah, I only paid $20 for pants. But anyways, it's just like that. So a lot of the skills that they had, back in the day, we don't have so much anymore. You can kind of see that when you're watching the Frontier House, how these groups of people are struggling because they are trying to figure out skills that aren't, that you might say are obsolete anymore. And now they have to actually use those. So let's talk about factory life a little bit. So even though factory life could be good, and I'm not saying anything about modern times either, I mean, perfectly good jobs, but some things might change. Lifestyle changes for the ladies. It'll give you a lot of opportunity to go and work somewhere. You could get good jobs. You wouldn't have to just stay at home and find a sugar daddy, or be stuck at home at all. You could go to different jobs. Obviously, the pay is going to be different between a child and a girl and a man, and it really just depends on what is available to you at the time period. And you're really all just kind of doing, if you look at the left, all doing the same kind of job here. So your upward mobility is going to be very limited on what you can be able to accomplish if you have life goals. But again, this is a big change for people compared to what they did have. So let's focus on child labor. Since we did say that there were children working at the time period in these factories, you can look and see these kids on the left standing on boxes, look like they're in some kind of food line or something. But look at the one on the right here. This kid's got his britches up tight, up over his knees, no shoes, no socks, standing on the equipment. You've got some kind of belt there, some kind of roller in there. And again, no rules. Imagine if this stuff was going on today. It wouldn't fly, especially in the United States, because we do have labor laws. But since schools really didn't have any rules either, really anything went with this. So, with the understanding that most children worked on family farms, they still do. It's not, a lot of you guys are farm families, and you don't expect to get paid for the chores that you were doing. And at the time period back in the 1800s, that's what it was expected of you. And it's also why your families had so many kids, because more hands make work easier. So it's not too different from that. But then, you're going in a factory, and kids as young as 7 or 8 years of age are going to be employed. Most of these are street kids, or they're orphans. And the big thing is they're not in school. They're doing these jobs that they really shouldn't be doing. They're probably getting paid, pennies, if even pennies, half pennies or whatever, but barely getting any wages, and no one is really supervising, kids doing this. So it's not something that any of us would really want to do in life at age 7 or 8. Heck, I know some 7 and 8-year-olds that can barely walk and chew gum. Some can't even tie their shoes, but yet they're working in these factories to make these goods. And I don't mean to laugh at it, just the absurdity of it at the time period, but that's what was actually allowable. And by 1880, more than 1 million children between 10 and 15 worked in factories. So you guys are complaining about doing this online schooling. Imagine that's what that could be. And you say, oh, that sounds like fun. I'd love to work in factories. All right, well, let's look at that then. So your working conditions are going to look like this. you've got ladies on the left, and that would be like a sewing factory, where they've got early, looks like Singer sewing machines in front of them, their own little workstation, and they've got whatever cotton or material they're working with at the time period. And that's what they're doing every day of every hour of every day that they're at work. They're kind of doing the same old thing right there. Not a lot of mobility, barely any sunlight, not a lot of fun. On the right, looks like you've got some kind of a smelting factory where you're melting down iron ore and whatever. So it's pretty hot, it's pretty dangerous. You see that iron ore floating around all over the place. So again, you might want to rethink not going to school at the time period versus working in factories. So these working conditions, again, very few labor laws. Your factories are poorly lit. You had very little fresh air. I mean, just look at this picture here that you have these kids, looks like in a coal factory or some sort, and your windows are all covered in black. You got barely any sunlight. It's cold, so they're all wearing their coats and hats. They're covered in soot. So you can imagine, breathing at the time period would not be very good. So I definitely wouldn't want to be working in that at that age. You had a lot of injuries and no insurance. So if a kid got injured, you kind of shrug your shoulders and say, okay, bring me the next kid. Again, sounds pretty terrible. Sounds similar to Jonathan Swift, and we talked about Modest Proposal last year, what you do with children who nobody cares for. And, this is what was allowable at the time period, so it's pretty sad. That a 12 to 14 hour workday. So again, you complainers who are whining about 20 minutes of note sets from me, imagine working in a factory from 12 to 14 hours a day. Now, granted, some of you guys probably play your Minecraft and other games online all the time, probably for 12 to 14 hours a day, but no one's going to be paying you to do that in real life. But instead, if you're working in a factory, look at this. Look at these kids. These are kids who are younger than you guys. I would say 6th and 5th grade. And they don't look real happy except for this weirdo over here smiling about it. Everybody else kind of sad. Look at how dirty they are. You got to question, where are the parents? And again, that makes you weep, almost sad for society at the time period. So what does happen is the need for workers' rights, for children's rights, for educational rights. And you take this stuff for granted. You take schooling for granted, I'm sure. I did too at your age. But it's better than what you could have been doing or could be doing based on what they had. So that's something we're going to have to talk about. We'll talk about the changes in terms of society, kind of the animosity that builds up between the North and the South. And we'll also talk about educational rights for the kids and women's rights as well. So that's it. Under 18 minutes. Do not forget, complete your note set, turn them back in, and make sure your questions are done as well. Have yourself a good day.